Hey, Paul and class of magicians. My name is Danny Zuker. I'm a comedy writer, was one of the executive producers on Modern Family and a lot of shows I'm less proud of. This is the first time I've been asked to address a room full of magicians. So I'm a little nervous because, frankly, I have to say, I would gladly take a course for comedians who could learn to do magic. Huge magic fan. So Paul asked me if I had any advice for jokes or joke writing or developing a persona or a character. And it's a really big question. It's probably a bigger question than a cameo can answer, but I'm going to give it a shot. I think like the key is to figure out who you are, what kind of person you are, what kind of character you are. Somebody told me, and I'm doing stand-up, I've recently gotten back into it, picked a great time, global pandemic. But the first couple of years of any stand-up's career, anybody who's doing comedy, is basically you're doing an impression of other comedians. You haven't really found your voice. You haven't found out you're doing, I relate to sort of somebody who's really dirty, so I'm going to do those dirty jokes, or I'm going to do observational, or I'm going to do political, or whatever. And you're kind of not... It's an impression, but you're learning the timing. And the key, and what would be very good to save time, is ask yourself who you are, Are you a guy or gal who is in their life is like their persona is good at like doing insults or, can do that. I mean, you have to be very careful with that kind of humor. Somebody like Jeff Ross or even going back to Don Rickles, it's like, okay, this guy's giving me a hard time, but it's sort of like they kind of look like lovable losers themselves, physically. You'll take something from Jeff Ross that maybe if like you were at a party with Brad Pitt and he was making fun of the way you looked or, being bald or whatever, you'd be like, you know what, screw you, dude. So it's finding those things in you that feel natural, not doing somebody else. And the good thing about being in a class or being with other people is you can get people's feedback. And I would use that. I would test out jokes and material and your persona. Like, what do people think of you when they see you? When I was discovering like who I was comedically, it was like I was sort of a little bit, I went with a more put upon attitude, a guy who didn't get the world. It wasn't a big stretch. The other thing I would suggest, and if you have any facility at all for comedy, is write stuff down. When something amuses you in the world or in your life or just a foible or somebody in your life says something kind of stupid or aggravating, write it down. You get an idea in the middle of the night, write it down. If I were to drop dead and someone went through the notes section on my phone, it would look like the ramblings of the Unabomber. So, but don't be afraid. Write those things down and find. I can't tell you how many times I was in a moment that wasn't particularly funny to me at the time, but I jotted it down, and I can think of a dozen episodes of Modern Family that kind of came out of my own foibles in that moment. So write those things down and look for the absurd. Don't take yourself seriously. It's always, if you can make yourself the object of that joke, and I don't know how you do this as a magician, frankly, because I know magicians are confident, but if that confidence can be a surprise. Winners, people who are winning all the time, it's not that they can't be funny, because they can, and it can be funny. It's just much harder. You're rooting for somebody who is, but like, so somebody getting out there and telling jokes about how tired they are about meeting all these women, or, oh, God, I don't know what to do with all this money I have, or, success. Unless you're making a joke about that, it's harder. So, as much as you can turn these things into jokes and make them relatable and be honest. I mean, all comedy comes from honesty. The best comedy does. Not to say that there aren't one-liners and people who are so good at just doing jokes, but they're few and far. There's not a lot of, Stephen Wrights and Dimitri Martins. They don't come around all the time, and those are just pure jokes. And if you can do that already, maybe you can teach me how to do that, because it's really, really hard. But yeah, so honesty, write stuff down, and be original. Like if you, this is another thing that like will turn people off right away. But like if you think you've heard a joke before, Google it. If you think somebody's talked about these things, Google it. Even when I tweet a joke, I like will frequently take those. My first thought is, I can't be the first person who this thing came to. I can't. And unfortunately, I'm usually right. But sometimes you're not, and then, move forward on that and think about what's unique to your situation. What was your childhood like? What was the weird thing you grew up with? What's the weird current thing right now? Are you single? Are you married? What's driving you crazy? If anywhere you can put that in, and frankly, putting that into a magic show is really cool to me. I just watched, it's not particularly funny, but I just watched that in and of itself, and I was blown away what could be done with magic and the storytelling you can do, and that's something that, like, just doing straight comedy, you can't. So, God, I hope that helped. That sounded like a lot of platitudes. It's really, comedy's hard. Oh, last thing. Don't be afraid to bomb. You most likely will not be funny the first couple times out. You just won't. It's hard. It's like, if I were to decide I wanted to play baseball, first time out, I'm probably not going to hit a major league fastball. And you're probably not going to kill the first time. Bombing is an important part of it. Don't be afraid. Be fearless. That's where you learn. That's where all the work gets done. So be brave enough to suck. Hope that helped. Okay, bye.